Welcome to the academic study of religion. My name is Steven Meigs, and I'm going to be your instructor for this course. First off, we need to talk about the academic study of religion, and I'm going to begin with three misconceptions, concerns that students sometimes have when beginning this course. One fear is that the student will have to agree with the professor's beliefs to be successful in the course. Fear not, that's not the case. I'm not going to be talking about my personal beliefs in this course. The course isn't about me at all. Your personal beliefs are your business, and you do not have to agree with my beliefs to master the material in this course successfully and receive the highest grade. Another fear, kind of the opposite, that some students have is that a professor may be a philosophical atheist and may denigrate or degrade or ridicule a student who has faith. To tell the truth, this does happen sometimes, but it will not happen here. It is never my intention in any way to devalue your faith claim, and if you should ever feel that I have, please tell me, because I'm certain there was some kind of misunderstanding. The third concern some students have, some students are afraid of this and some students are looking forward to it, but it's the idea that because this is a course in religion and religion is a sensitive subject, that we're going to have a whole bunch of knockdown, drag-out debates on the subject of religion. Well, that's actually not going to happen in this course. This is not a course where we are going to argue about whose faith claims are better than somebody else's. We're not going to be making value judgments. In every case, we're going to be looking at religions in terms of the value they have for their adherents. Okay? So, along with this, we're going to respect other people's faith claims or their lack of them as much as we find out about them. And we're going to try to look at every religion from the point of view of someone who is involved in that religion. There will be no evangelism of any kind. There will be no trying to convince other students that your particular faith claim or lack of it is better than theirs. Alrighty, feel better? So what is the academic study of religion all about? First of all, it's very different from the ecclesiastical study of religion. And so let's talk about the differences here. I'm going to put my face here in the corner of this slide, and this is the slide we're going to be looking at here. There's a document available that has this printed out. Hopefully you've gotten the document and you're looking at it on a separate sheet of paper. But in case you're not, I'll put it on the screen here. And we begin with a quote that says, "He that knows one knows none." Now, there was a time when if you wanted to include all human beings, you used the male personal pronoun. Obviously, we don't have a neuter personal pronoun in the English language. But if that happens to offend you in any way, another way that we could say this is that to know one is to know none. Now, this was first quoted by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, referring to languages. To know but one language is to know none. What does he mean by that? It's later quoted by Friedrich Max Müller, we usually just call him Max Müller, referring to religions. So he's implying that to know only one religion is in fact to know none. Now this might sound a little counterintuitive, but let's talk about this. First of all, a little bit about Max Müller. He lived from 1823 to 1900. He was a famous philologist, and he was born in the last decade of Goethe's life. What's philology? It's sometimes called historical linguistics. Philology studies the historical growth of languages by studying written literature. Max Müller was a scholar of Sanskrit, the language of ancient India, and its many sacred writings. Müller was greatly inspired by Goethe. So a little bit about Goethe. Goethe lived from 1749 to 1832, and he was a very famous novelist, poet, and playwright, and is widely considered the greatest German literary figure of the modern era. Goethe was not primarily a philologist, but to quote Friedrich Nietzsche in his posthumously published 1874 work, We Philologists, "The greatest events in philology are the appearances of Goethe, Schopenhauer, and Wagner. Standing on their shoulders, we look far into the distance." So says Nietzsche. Now, in 1873, Max Müller was championing a new scientific study of religion, as he calls it. Today we would call it the academic study of religion. What Müller is saying is much like the comparative study of languages in philology. Mueller was arguing that the comparative study of religions would also be extremely beneficial, and it is in this context that he repurposes Goethe's quote. By the way, Mueller is often considered the father of the modern field of religious studies, that is, the academic study of religion, beginning in the 19th century, but really taking off in the 20th century. The study of world religions was often referred to as comparative religion, and sometimes still is. This is how we learn anything. It's how science operates. We compare things with each other, and we make conclusions when we look at the distinctions. But the interesting thing about comparing things is you also have to know what they have in common, or the distinctions are not meaningful. When Max Mueller says he that knows one knows none, and when Goethe says he that knows one knows none, they're talking about the fact that if you only know one language, or you only know one religion, your definition of language or religion is going to be the same as the language or the religion you know. If the only language you know is English, for instance, you might speak it and write it perfectly. You might be a master of the English language, but your definition of language, that is your conception of language, and of English are exactly the same thing. Your understanding of language does not transcend your understanding of English. By learning other languages, you begin to realize something, and that is there's more than one way to communicate. If you're thinking about, for instance, Spanish or French and the relationship to English, those languages are very similar. They use very similar syntax. But if you look at Far Eastern languages, say Japanese or Mandarin Chinese, the syntax is very, very different, which is why sometimes it makes them very difficult to translate. Here's the interesting thing about language, though, and the syntax it uses. As I'm speaking to you right now in the English language, the syntax that I am using to communicate is the same syntax that I am using to conceive these thoughts in my mind before I speak them. So when you look at someone who has a language with a very different syntax, they're not just communicating in a very different way, they're actually thinking, that is, structuring thoughts in their mind in a very different way. Once you understand this, then you understand more than just your own language. And the beautiful thing is now you actually even understand more about your own language because you finally have something to compare it with. Max Mueller is saying the same thing about religion. Let's say that you're a Christian, and that's all that you know. And you may know Christianity very well. You may be the best Christian Jesus has ever seen. But if all you know is Christianity, your definition of religion and your definition of Christianity are basically the same thing. And if you're exposed to any other religions, all you see are the differences. That is, how far they fall away from your conception of what religion should be. And seeing only the differences, the only conclusion you can come to is everybody else but you is somehow wrong. Obviously, we're not going to learn much by doing that. Now, much as the same way Goethe was speaking of in studying other languages, by studying other religions, you're not only learning more about other religions, you're learning more about religion itself and realizing that religion is a concept that transcends your personal understanding of religion. And finally, you're actually learning more about your own religion because you finally have something to compare it with. That's what we mean when we say to know one is to know none. Next, we want to look at the difference between the academic study of religion and what we might call the ecclesiastical study of religion. Academic pertains to the academy or the university. Ecclesiastical pertains to what we might call a sectarian or a religious organization. Okay, an organization that is, in some cases, subcultural, doesn't represent the views of everybody in our modern multicultural and pluralistic societies. The ecclesiastical study of religion is neither objective nor unbiased. Ecclesiastical organizations hold value judgments regarding what is the true religion. and they have an agenda to promote their truth. The ecclesiastical approach is incompatible with the academic study of religion because we are not going to make these kind of value judgments. In the academic study of religion, we want to first be objective. Now, the best way to talk about objectivity is to talk about the opposite of it, which would be subjectivity. If you think of the structure of a sentence, the subject is the main part of the sentence. It's what everything is focused on. Now, you are the subject of your life, and everything that happens in your life, you are going to make value judgments about. But the value judgments you make are going to have to do with how these things affect you as the subject of your life. And this is as it should be. Things that work well for you, things that give you a higher quality of life, things that help you to feel better about yourself and your possibilities, you're generally going to judge as good things. Things that work for you. Things that don't work for you, you're going to judge as having less value. But that's subjective. It's all about how those things affect you, the subject of your life. The problem with looking at religion with a subjective point of view is that you're looking at religions that have never worked for you and perhaps never could work for you simply because of the way that you were raised. But that doesn't mean they don't work for the people for whom they work, to be a little bit redundant. So we need to not see these religions from our point of view because they don't work for us, but we need to see them from the point of view of somebody for whom they do work. I had a student many years ago in a world religions course where we were talking about some of the deeper understandings of the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism. And this student commented to me during the break that she didn't understand how anybody could believe this kind of stuff. And I told her, that's interesting, because millions of people find ultimate meaning and purpose in this particular belief system, and yet you can't understand how even one person could. So there's only two possibilities here. Either millions of people are completely insane, and you're not, or else you lack perspective. She bristled a little bit at that comment, but she got it later on, and by the way, she got an A+ in that course. Anyway, her response is a very, very common one. How could anyone believe that? But we're judging subjectively, because that kind of belief system, we are deciding, would never work for us, so how could it work for anybody? But that's the wrong question to ask, because those religious belief systems and practices do work for millions of people. The fact they don't work for you doesn't mean they don't work. To ask, how could that work for anyone, is like standing out in the rain and getting soaked and asking, how could it be raining? How could it be raining? It's kind of a silly question, because it is raining. And you have to accept the reality that it is. And once you do, you can make a decision. Do I want to go inside out of the rain? Do I want to put up an umbrella? Or do I want to dance in the rain and enjoy it? But in any case, it is raining. And refusing to accept the fact that it's raining is completely counterproductive and silly. We have to accept that these religions work for the people for whom they work. I'm going to try to present everything as much as I can from the position of people for whom these ideas work. And by doing that, I can help you to see the value in these ideas. We mentioned earlier that this is a comparative study. Let me say something else about comparative studies. Perhaps you, in your English Composition 1 course, have learned to write a comparison and contrast essay. When you wrote that comparison and contrast essay, if it was a good one, you chose 2 or more subjects that have a lot in common. And they have to have a lot in common for it to work. If you wrote a comparison and contrast essay about the difference between Martians and paperclips, it would be a very bad essay. Because Martians and paperclips really have nothing in common. At least I don't think they do. However, if you wrote a comparison and contrast essay about the differences between raising a boy or raising a girl human, or having a puppy, or having a kitten, it would probably be a great essay. If you were talking about the difference between apples and oranges, also could be a good essay. And the reason is because in all three of those cases, those subjects have an awful lot in common. And once we know what they have in common, then when we look at the differences, they're much more meaningful, and we can learn a lot from them. Now, when you're talking about boys and girls, puppies and kittens, or apples and oranges, everybody pretty much knows what those have in common. The problem is that with religion, we don't. A lot of people have no idea what they have in common. In fact, as I mentioned before, when they first look at another religion, the first thing they see are all the differences. And if all you see are the differences, the only conclusion you can come to is that somehow these other religions are all wrong. They make no sense. They don't work. How could they work for anyone? So, to properly compare religions, we have to first start out by looking at what they all have in common. And that is going to be what's going to happen in our very next subject when we talk about the features of religion. So I'll leave that for now, but suffice to say, we're going to start by looking at what all religions have in common, and then, once we know these different features and functions, we can look at how they are manifested differently in different religions, different societies, and different periods of time. Next, we're going to look at a comprehensive study of religion. We want to look at all aspects of religion, that is, all the different ways that people can embrace religious beliefs or engage in religious actions. We might say all the different ways people are being religious. And to do this, we're going to have to take a multidisciplinary approach. We're going to be using a little bit of philosophy, psychology, sociology, anthropology, history, humanities, and some other disciplines. Religion involves every area of people's lives, and so we need to see how religion functions in each of these fields of study. So it is very common, and I've heard it many times, for a student to say, wow, the stuff we learned about today is the same stuff we were just learning in Asian humanities or in anthropology. You're going to find out there's an awful lot of overlap. Lastly, compassionate. You could say empathetic. We want to see religion, as I mentioned before, through the eyes of those for whom it works. We want to put ourselves in their position and imagine what it's like to be them. Now, this is something we do all the time. Every time you read a good book or you go to a movie and you have a protagonist in a situation that's somewhat different from your life, but in some ways is kind of similar, you put yourself in the position of someone very different from you, and you imagine what it's like to be them in the situation you see them in. And we don't have a real problem doing this. But when we get to religion, sometimes people have a little bit of a problem. They're afraid that somehow putting themselves in the position of someone else who believes in a religion that's not the true religion might be damaging to their faith. Well, if thinking about what it's like to be someone else can be damaging to your faith isn't much. You should be able to look at what it's like to be other people and come back to your own faith and know more about why you believe it or why you embrace it or why it works for you. If anything you learn in this course challenges your faith or your faith tradition, then perhaps it needs to be challenged. And the outcome may be a purifying of your faith. It may be a good thing. So, again, we want to see things from the eyes of someone else. Now, to do this, we have to stop seeing things through our own eyes. If I want to imagine what it's like to be a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Taoist, then I have to stop thinking about what it's like to be me, in my religion, in my society, with my ethnicity, and so on. And what we're going to talk about now is a principle that we call bracketing. Bracketing is absolutely required if you want to study someone who has a completely different understanding of what is meaningful in life. What we are going to have to bracket Foremost in the academic study of religion are personal faith claims, or the lack of them. I'll talk about that in a second. Bracketing refers to a suspension of personal beliefs. Or, as you're going to read in your book in a later chapter, the ancient Greek term is epoche. It looks like epoch with an E on the end of it, but it means suspension. And ancient philosophers realized that to understand a different way of looking at reality, they first had to suspend all prior judgments regarding the best way to look at this. They had to set aside what had already worked for them and try it from a completely different point of view. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about bracketing. We're talking about the suspension of personal beliefs. We're talking about a willingness to research and experience another religion without our personal bias. And again, that involves putting yourself in the position of somebody for whom that religion works. Now, you don't have to fear. Your faith claims will be right there for you to pick up as you walk out the door, so to speak, when the class is over. Now, the last thing I want to mention pertains to this last paragraph on your page here, and that is regarding atheism. Atheism is not a religion per se, but it does involve a faith claim. That is, a deeply held conviction about the nature of ultimate reality. And that conviction determines how one evaluates religious beliefs and religious practices. As such, an atheist is going to need to bracket his or her personal beliefs just as much as an evangelical Christian, for instance, in order to really understand how a religion works in the lives of its adherents. What we cannot do is make value judgments that somebody who has a different faith, or lacks faith, or has faith, is somehow deficient. We have to set those kind of judgments aside. Can we do that? So we're going to respect each other. We're going to respect our differences of opinion. And as we're looking at other religions, we're going to try to imagine what it's like to be a person involved in that religion and understand how that religion would work for us. Once again, welcome to the academic study of religion.